The sky above the battlefield burned crimson, the distant flashes of energy weapons streaking like angry comets across the void. Captain Doran Keeley watched from the bridge of the Resolute, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Below him, the last human outpost on Iridia was being annihilated by the Xantherians, their towering siege walkers obliterating what little remained of the city's defenses. Each explosion was a death knell, and Doran knew it was only a matter of time before the same fate reached the battered remnants of the Earth Coalition fleet. Shields are failing. The tactical officer's voice cracked, panic bleeding through her professional tone. We're down to 30%. Divert power from auxiliary systems, Doran ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. Keep the forward batteries firing. The Xantherians didn't need tactics. Their technological superiority made brute force more than sufficient. They descended on human strongholds like predators, their sleek black ships blotting out the stars, their advanced weaponry tearing through defenses as though they were paper. Doran's ship was the last line of resistance in this sector, and it was a fight they were losing. "Sir, the Valiant has gone dark," came another report. Doran didn't need to look to confirm it. The Valiant had been one of their strongest remaining cruisers, its loss a devastating blow. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. He had fought alongside the men and women aboard that ship for years. They were gone now, just names that would join the growing list of casualties. "Hold your course," Doran said quietly, though his heart screamed to retreat. They couldn't win, but they could buy time for the civilian transports to escape. A sudden voice crackled over the comms, sharp and commanding. "Captain Keeley, stand down. Your sacrifice won't change the outcome." Doran turned to the comms officer. "Who is that?" The answer came with hesitation. "Commander Rains, sir. She's patched in from Fleet Command." The name sent a ripple of tension through the bridge crew. Commander Rain was a ghost story, a legend whispered among military ranks. She had been a brilliant strategist once, but her career had ended in disgrace after she advocated for tactics deemed too ruthless, too inhumane. Many thought her dead, but there she was, her voice cold as steel. "I'm not abandoning my post," Doran shot back, his voice edged with defiance. "There are lives at stake here." "There are always lives at stake," Rain replied, unflinching. "But if you want to save humanity, you'll follow my orders. Pull back your fleet. Now." Doran hesitated, his instincts warring with his duty. The coalition had been built on principles of unity and sacrifice. They fought for more than survival. They fought for the right to remain who they were. But as he looked at the tactical display, showing the hopeless odds arrayed against them, he couldn't deny the truth in Rain's words. Staying would mean annihilation. "Helm, set a course for the fallback point," he ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. Around him, the crew scrambled to comply. As the Resolute turned away from the burning remnants of Iridia, Doran stepped away from the command console, gripping the edges of the viewport. The stars stretched before them, cold and indifferent. "You made the right choice," Rain said through the comms. "But we're done with right choices. It's time to make the necessary ones." The words hung in the air long after the channel went silent. 3 days later, Doran found himself standing in the dimly lit war room of a hidden coalition outpost, the hum of the holo displays casting eerie blue shadows on the walls. Around him, other fleet captains murmured in hushed tones, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. At the head of the room stood Rain, her sharp features illuminated by the tactical map behind her. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "We're losing this war because we're fighting it on their terms," she began, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "The Xantherians are faster, smarter, and more advanced than we are. But they're not invincible. They have weaknesses we've been too afraid to exploit." Rain's presence was magnetic, her eyes burning with conviction. She outlined a plan that was as audacious as it was horrifying, targeting Xantherian supply lines with biological weapons, using human decoys to bait enemy fleets into ambushes, and sabotaging enemy infrastructure with tactics that would leave collateral damage in their wake. "This isn't a war we can win by holding the moral high ground," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "We either fight to survive, or we die clinging to principles that mean nothing to the dead." Doran felt a wave of unease ripple through him. Everything about Rain's plan defied the rules he had spent his life upholding. Yet, as he looked around the room, he saw a spark reignite in the eyes of his fellow captains. They were desperate for hope, no matter the cost. After the meeting, Doran approached Rain. She stood alone, studying the holographic map with a laser focus. "Commander," he said, his tone cautious, "what you're proposing, it goes against everything we've sworn to protect." Rain turned to him, her expression unreadable. "And what have your oaths done for us so far? Captain Keeley, how many colonies have fallen while we clung to outdated ideals?" Doran hesitated. "What makes you think your way will work?" "Because I've studied them," she said simply. "The Xantherians are arrogant. They underestimate us because they see us as inferior. That's their weakness, and I intend to exploit it." Her confidence was unsettling, but it was also infectious. Doran nodded reluctantly. "What do you need me to do?" Rain allowed herself a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll see soon enough." 2 weeks later, the galaxy began to whisper of humanity's resurgence. A critical Xantherian supply depot was destroyed in a surprise attack, the remains laced with traces of a weapon they had never seen before. Human ships, thought to be retreating, reappeared in unexpected places, striking with precision and vanishing before the Xantherians could retaliate. Rain's tactics were brutal and unorthodox, but they were working. For the first time in years, humanity was not simply surviving. They were fighting back. Yet as Doran watched Rain from the bridge of his newly repaired ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were trading one kind of destruction for another. The war wasn't over, and neither was the cost of victory. The dark expanse of space was silent, broken only by the distant glow of dying stars and the muted hum of the fleet's engines. Commander Rain stood at the center of the Resolute-S war room, her sharp gaze fixed on the holographic projection of his Xantherian fleet formation. Around her, officers shifted uneasily, their expressions a mix of awe and trepidation. The plan she was outlining was as precise as it was ruthless. Every detail, from the bait to the kill, had been calculated with clinical efficiency. "They'll take the bait," Rain said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Their arrogance will blind them to the trap. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late." Captain Doran Keeley leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed, his eyes narrowing as he studied the simulation. He couldn't deny the brilliance of the plan. Rain had identified a weakness in his Xantherians' communication relays, exploiting their over-reliance on centralized command. Yet, the cost of success lingered at the edge of his thoughts, like a shadow waiting to consume them. "And what about the colony?" he asked, breaking the silence. Rain didn't look at him. "Collateral damage." The words hung heavy in the room, and a ripple of unease spread among the officers. The colony, one of the last bastions of humanity in this sector, would be left defenseless to draw the Xantherians into the trap. It wasn't the first time Rain had proposed such sacrifices, but this time, Doran felt the weight of it pressing against his chest. "Those are lives you're talking about," he pressed, his voice low but firm. "And those lives will be meaningless if we lose this war." Rain shot back, her gaze sharp as glass. "Every soldier here knows the stakes. Survival isn't won through sentiment." The room fell silent again, the only sound the faint buzz of the holographic display. Doran clenched his jaw, suppressing the anger rising within him. He wanted to argue, to fight for the colony, but deep down, he knew Rain was right. The Xantherians would show no mercy, and their only chance at survival was to fight fire with fire. Later, as the officers dispersed, Doran found himself lingering. He watched Rain as she deactivated the simulation, her movements precise and deliberate. She seemed untouched by the weight of her decisions, her focus unwavering. "You're making it easy for them to hate us," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. Rain didn't turn. "They already hate us? I'm making it harder for them to kill us." Her words were matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion. Doran wanted to believe there was something beneath her icy exterior, a flicker of doubt or regret. But her expression betrayed nothing. The operation began 2 days later. The human fleet moved into position near the abandoned mining colony of Aramis 7, the husks of its once thriving cities, now a grim reminder of the Xantherians' efficiency. The bait was set, a falsified distress signal broadcast on every frequency, designed to mimic the desperate calls of a human colony under attack. From the bridge of the Resolute, Doran watched as the Xantherian fleet emerged from hyperspace. Their ships were sleek and menacing, their black hulls absorbing the light of the nearby star. They moved with terrifying precision, converging on the colony with predatory intent. "They're taking it," Rain said, her tone devoid of satisfaction or relief. She stood beside Doran, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "All units, prepare for Phase 2. The human fleet struck with brutal efficiency. Hidden among the debris of the Aramis asteroid field, the ships unleashed a barrage of firepower, targeting the Xantherian command vessels. The Xantherians reacted swiftly, their formations shifting as they attempted to counter the ambush. But Rain's plan had anticipated their every move. Doran gave the orders mechanically, his focus on the battle unfolding before him. For a moment, it seemed they were winning. Xantherian ships erupted in bursts of flame and debris, their sleek forms shattered by the relentless assault. Then came the retaliation. A Xantherian dreadnought unleashed a devastating counterattack, its beam weapons slicing through human ships like paper. The Halcyon, a cruiser stationed on the fleet's left flank, disintegrated in a blinding explosion. Doran's stomach twisted as the casualty reports began to flood in. "Hold the line!" Rain's voice rang out, commanding and unyielding. Despite the losses, the human fleet pressed the attack, following Rain's precise instructions. One by one, the Xantherian ships fell, their command structure unable to adapt to the chaos. When the last of the enemy vessels exploded, leaving only smoldering wreckage in its wake, the bridge erupted in a chorus of cheers. But Doran couldn't celebrate. His eyes were drawn to the colony below, now little more than ash and ruin. The Xantherians had razed it to the ground before falling into the trap. Thousands of lives snuffed out, their deaths a calculated cost of victory. In the aftermath, the fleet regrouped at a hidden outpost. The officers gathered once more in the war room, their faces a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Rain stood at the center, her posture as composed as ever. "We've proven they can bleed," she said, her voice steady. "Now we need to make them fear us." Her words were met with silence. No one dared to question her methods, not after the success of the operation. Yet, Doran could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, the unspoken doubts that lingered in the minds of those around him. As the officers dispersed, Doran approached Rain again. "You call this a victory, but how many more like it can we endure? How much of ourselves are we willing to sacrifice?" Rain met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "This isn't about what we're willing to sacrifice, Captain. It's about what we need to sacrifice. The Xantherians don't care about our humanity. If we want to survive, we can't afford to care either." Doran stared at her, searching for a crack in her armor, a hint of the burden she carried. But Rain remained as resolute as ever, her determination unshakable. As he left the war room, Doran couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a fine line, one that could easily lead them to victory or to something far darker. For the first time, he found himself questioning not just their chances of survival, but the kind of future they were fighting for. The Xantherian homeworld hung in the void like an ominous jewel, its black surface webbed with streaks of glowing blue veins, evidence of the advanced technology that had brought humanity to its knees. From the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Rain watched the holographic projection of the planet rotate slowly, her expression as unyielding as ever. This was the heart of the enemy, the core of their strength, and the key to their downfall. The mission ahead was as audacious as it was final. "Everything we've done has led to this," Rain said, her voice sharp and clear. The officers gathered around the tactical table hung on her every word, their exhaustion momentarily replaced by the gravity of the moment. "If we succeed, the Xantherians will be crippled beyond recovery. If we fail, There won't be another chance. Captain Doran Keeley stood across from her, his arms crossed, the weight of the plan bearing down on him. For weeks, he had followed Rain's ruthless strategies, watching as humanity clawed its way back from the brink. He had seen the victories, but he had also counted the cost, the lives lost, the lines crossed, the ideals abandoned. And now, with the final assault looming, he couldn't silence the voice in his mind that asked whether it was all worth it. How do we even know this will work? Doran asked, his tone sharp but weary. Rain met his gaze with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him. Because it has to. The plan was simple in theory, but staggeringly complex in execution. A small infiltration team would deliver a destabilization device, an experimental weapon designed to overload the planet's energy core. The Xantherians' reliance on centralized power meant that if the core was destroyed, their entire infrastructure would collapse. But the weapon had to be deployed from the surface, deep within one of their most fortified installations. It was a mission designed for desperation. Doran had been chosen to lead the team, a decision Rain had made without hesitation. He wanted to argue, but he knew better. Rain trusted him to see it through, not because of any personal connection, but because he was capable. It was a cold kind of trust, but it was the only kind Rain seemed to offer. As the Resolute approached the Xantherian system, cloaked in the advanced stealth technology that Rain's faction had developed, the crew worked in tense silence. The weight of the mission pressed down on all of them. The Xantherians were not to be underestimated. Their vigilance and technological superiority made even the smallest misstep fatal. Doran stood in the armory, strapping on his combat gear. The weight of the equipment was familiar, but this time it felt heavier. His team was a mix of experienced soldiers and engineers, each of them chosen for their skills and their willingness to take on what most would consider a suicide mission. Among them was Lieutenant Darien, a young officer who had once been outspoken in his criticism of Rain's methods. Now his face was set with grim determination, the idealism he had once clung to replaced by a hard-edged resolve. "Lieutenant," Doran said, tightening the straps of his armor. Darien looked up, his expression unreadable. "Sir, this mission, it's not just about survival," Doran said, his voice low. "It's about ensuring there's something left of us worth surviving for." Darien nodded, but the flicker of doubt in his eyes was unmistakable. The drop to the planet's surface was harrowing. The infiltration ship sliced through the atmosphere undetected, its cloaking systems barely holding against the Xantherian scanners. When they landed on the outskirts of the installation, the team moved swiftly, their movements rehearsed but tense. The air was thick and acrid, the ground beneath their boots an unnatural black, humming faintly with energy. Inside the installation, the Xantherians were as formidable as ever. Their towering forms moved with an unsettling grace, their crystalline armor reflecting the harsh, artificial light. The team worked in near silence, every step calculated, every breath measured. They planted charges to distract the guards and create a clear path to the core. When they finally reached the energy core, its sheer size and complexity were overwhelming. The glowing blue veins that ran through the planet converged here, pulsating with a rhythm that felt almost alive. Doran's team began setting up the destabilization device, their movements precise despite the tension crackling in the air. 2 minutes, the engineer said, his voice steady but strained. The first wave of Xantherians arrived before they were done. The ensuing firefight was brutal, the team's weapons struggling to penetrate the enemy's advanced armor. Doran and Darien fought side by side, their movements synchronized, each covering the other as they held the line. "Device is armed," the engineer shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We gotta go now. Fall back," Doran ordered, his voice ringing with authority. The team retreated, their path littered with the bodies of fallen comrades and enemies alike. The installation trembled as the charges they had planted earlier detonated, sending plumes of fire and debris into the air. The Xantherians pursued relentlessly, their determination unbroken even as their fortress crumbled around them. When the team finally reached the extraction point, the infiltration ship was already waiting, its engines roaring with urgency. Doran was the last aboard, his rifle still firing as the ramp closed behind him. The ship shot into the sky, leaving the collapsing installation behind. From the safety of orbit, the Resolute's crew watched as the planet began to convulse. The destabilization device had done its work, overloading the core and triggering a chain reaction that would spread across the entire Xantherian infrastructure. The glowing blue veins that covered the planet flickered and dimmed, and then, with a final, deafening roar, the core imploded. Silence fell over the bridge as the crew stared at the shattered remains of the Xantherian homeworld. For a moment, there was no celebration, no relief, only the weight of what they had done. Rain broke the silence. The Xantherians will fall back now. Without their homeworld, their command structure is broken. We've won. Doran turned to her, his expression unreadable. At what cost? She met his gaze, her face as composed as ever. The cost of survival. As the fleet began its retreat, the weight of the victory settled over them. The Xantherians were defeated, but the price of that victory would haunt them all. For Doran, it wasn't just the lives lost or the lines crossed. It was the knowledge that they had become something unrecognizable in the fight to survive. Rain, standing at the edge of the bridge, seemed unaffected. But as she gazed out at the stars, her reflection in the viewport betrayed a flicker of something deeper, something she would never allow herself to show.